your busy schedule today to join us for this important matter where we're going to discuss 401k rollovers. As Bridget mentioned, my name is Jarrell Harvey, and I'm a financial advisor in the Wealth Management Group. And today's conversation is truly designed to help you make a more informed decision with respect to your 401k plan. So essentially, why are we here today and what are we going to discuss on this webinar? So it's not uncommon to change employers several times during the course of your career. And given all the other things that you have to worry about when changing jobs, it is easy to forget about the options that are available to you with respect to your 401k plan. And so again, this webinar, we're going to review your options and look at some of the factors that you would need to consider when choosing the right option for you for a rollover. All right, so when we change employers, you have several options available to you. And when, with respect to your 401k plan, so given the importance of these assets to you for helping you achieve your retirement goals, it is critical that you consider your options and make the best choice for you. So some of the general options that are available include, number one, a cash out. And you can cash out some or all of your 401k plan savings. However, the amount withdrawn will be subject to income taxes and applicable an early withdrawal penalty if not rolled over into another 401k plan or an IRA within 60 days. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the cash out option and some of the pros and cons about that. The other option is to leave your assets in your previous employer's 401k plan. And so if you have more than $5,000 in your existing 401k, you can generally opt to remain invested in your previous employer's 401k plan. If the amount is less than $5,000 but more than $1,000, the employer may opt to retain the money in the plan, or they may transfer the money into a separate account. If the amount is less than $1,000, the employer can direct that the cash be distributed to you. Once you leave the company, you cannot continue to make contributions to the ex-employer's plan. However, and be aware that many employers charge a fee to administer accounts if you leave your money within their plan. Thirdly, you have the option to roll over to a new plan. So depending on the provisions of your previous plan and your new plan, you may be able to transfer some or all of the account to your new employer's plan. Beware that some of the companies don't allow new employees to participate in the 401k plan immediately. So if there is this situation at your new company, there will be a waiting period, and you may have to leave your money at the former employer for a certain period of time. And then the last thing that we're really going to discuss is looking at some of your options around rolling over to an IRA account. And so you can choose to roll over your money to either a traditional IRA or to a Roth IRA. And we're going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of both of those options as well during our conversation today. So first, we're going to talk about the cash out option that's available to you. So whenever you're leaving an employer, again, it's not uncommon to have concerns about short-term spending. And so many times people may leave their employers for various reasons, whether they was laid off or in a career transition. And so, again, as I've mentioned, that it's not uncommon to maybe have some short-term needs. And as a result, it's very easy to be tempted to withdraw funds from your 401k plan to help cover some of those expenses or financial needs. However, I don't advise doing so for a number of reasons, and including some of the things that I previously mentioned around taxes, and also the way it may impact your investment savings. So first, let's talk a little bit about the taxes and penalties, because that is really one of the big reasons why cashing out is not a great option. And so the amount withdrawn will be subject to income taxes and may also be subject to an early withdrawal penalty if you're under the age of 59 and a half. And so depending on your income tax bracket, the total amount of tax and the penalties could easily exceed over 40%. And so these taxes and penalties can drastically reduce the net amount that you actually receive and actually are able to save and enjoy during your retirement years. Secondly, you lose the benefit of tax deferral. So one of the primary benefits of a 401k is the tax deferred growth on your assets. However, if you cash out and do not roll over the funds into another tax qualified account, the assets will lose their tax deferral status. This can also have a serious impact on your ability to grow your wealth in your retirement years. Nearly half of U.S. employees cash out their 401k accounts when leaving their jobs, according to a recent survey that was done by the Hewitt Associates. And so I really want to take a deep look and highlight the impacts that taxes and penalties can have on your ability to save for retirement. So we've already talked about that you really need to decide before you withdraw any of your funds to consider and to look at the consequences around taxes and penalties. And so some of the relevant taxes and penalties include the 20% withholding tax. So when your employer writes you a check, when you decide and you go to them to say, I want to cash out of my 401k plan, they're automatically going to withhold 20% for federal taxes. And most of the time, this is a federal requirement, and so they don't really have a lot of wiggle room around that, and so they have to withhold that 20%. And so in other words, if you want to withdraw $10,000 from your 401k, you will only receive $8,000 because remember, they're withholding that 20% for federal taxes. The other big type of tax that's out there is your ordinary income tax. And so if the funds are not rolled over into another tax qualified account, such as an IRA or an employer-sponsored plan within 60 days, any portion that is not rolled over, including the 20% withholding, will be considered a distribution and thus subject to ordinary income tax in the year of withdrawal. So this includes both federal and state income tax if you have state income tax for the state that you live in. So again, let's go back to the previous example that I mentioned about if you decide to take $10,000 and you want to roll over the total amount, you must personally deposit out of your own pocket the 20% that was taken out. So again, in our example, if you want to take a $10,000 distribution, they withhold $2,000. If you want to contribute that money later into a 401k or to another 401k or to an IRA, you will have to pay that $2,000 directly out of your own pocket. The other thing that I want to say that you might want to keep in mind is that if the distribution that you take is large enough, it can also potentially or possibly bump you up to a higher tax bracket. And then, again, that can have a bigger impact on the amount of taxes that you have to pay. The last thing is the 10% early withdrawal penalty. So typically, if you're under the age of 59 and a half, the full amount of withdrawal will be subject to a 10% early withdrawal penalty unless a relevant exception applies to your situation. So here's another example. I know I was just talking about giving you an example about that $10,000, but this is maybe even a more detailed example, and it may give you some sense of the tax implications and all the various penalties that can be attributed to a cash out. And so again, let's just, for hypothetical purposes, just take a gentleman. I'm going to call him Steve for today. So Steve, after leaving his previous employer, Steve, he's 38 years old. He decides that he wants to cash out of his 401k plan. And for Steve, he currently has a 401k plan or account value that's at $50,000. So as I mentioned, the company is already automatically required to withhold 20%. So Steve is going to receive a check in his mail for $40,000. At the end of the year, within the next year, when Steve gets ready to do his taxes, he's going to sit down with his accountant, and if, say, Steve, in this case, is in a 28% tax bracket. If he's in a 28% tax bracket, he's going to have to pay an additional $4,000 than the taxes that was already withheld by his employer. So now he's looking at $14,000 that he's having to pay in federal tax income, and that's what you see on your screen. Also, let's assume that he lives in a state where the state income tax is 5%, so he's going to have to pay out an additional $2,500. And then, as I mentioned, Steve, he's 38 years old, so he's under the age of 59 and a half, so he's also going to have to pay a 10% early withdrawal penalty. So that's an additional $5,000. And so when you add up all those taxes and penalties, he's actually only netting at the end of the day $28,500. So you can see that's a significant reduction than the $50,000. And in fact, when you look at it in percentage terms, he's only receiving 57% of the money that he initially had invested in his account. So you can see how this can really have an impact on his long-term saving and some of his retirement plans. Ultimately, Steve will probably be likely better suited to keep his assets invested or have them rolled over to an IRA or to some other type of option. We mentioned that with cashing out, there's a big burden around taxes and penalties, what we just discussed. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is that there's also the potential that you'll lose the tax deferral component that goes along with being inside of a 401k or inside of an IRA type of account. And so what the tax deferral means is that you do not have to pay any taxes on earnings in the account until the assets are withdrawn. So over time, this tax deferred compounding can provide better returns than can be realized in a taxable account. However, like as I mentioned, this tax deferral is lost if you withdraw the funds from your 401k and do not roll them over into another tax qualified account within 60 days. So what you have on your screen, this chart, it also allows us to see the potential loss that can happen when you don't have tax deferral and how that can impact your investment goals. So the chart compares the hypothetical performance of $10,000 invested in a taxable and a tax-deferred account over a 30-year period. And so we make a couple of assumptions. We're assuming that you're receiving an 8% annual return and that you're in a tax bracket, again, of 28%. At the end of the 30-year period, the investment in the taxable account has an ending value of $57,831. However, you can also notice that the account in the tax deferred has $79,365. So you, at the end of the day, you have close to $22,000 more, $21,000 roughly, in the tax deferral. And again, that can have a tremendous impact on the amount of funds that you have during your retirement years. So the combined effects of taxes and penalties and the loss of tax deferral can seriously derail your long-term investment objectives and retirement goals. And for these reasons, it is usually inadvisable to take distributions from a 401k plan, and this should only be done as a last resort. All right, so your other option, we just talked about the cash out. The second option that you have available to you is to leave your assets in your previous 401k plan. So most 401k plans will allow you to stay in the company's plan after leaving employment, provided, again, that the account value is over $5,000. And we talked earlier about if your account is less than $5,000, the company may require you to cash out or may move your account into a separate account outside of the 401k plan. So remaining your previous employer plan can be the easiest option, as it allows you to keep your retirement assets growing without having to worry about rolling over the assets to a new plan or to an IRA. And some of the potential benefits of leaving your assets in your previous employer's 401k plan include, since you're not withdrawing any funds, you don't have to worry about paying any of those income taxes or early withdrawal penalties that we just discussed. Your 401k assets will continue to grow tax deferred. This is often, again, as I mentioned, the simplest form, as it generally requires little to no paperwork. And then lastly, if you're happy with the investment options offered within your previous employer's plan, this option allows you to stay invested and maintain your current asset allocation. Again, this means that you won't have to select any new investments or re-implement an asset allocation plan for yourself. And you're able to generally retain the ability to adjust your period or adjust your portfolio over time. So I did mention that you're not able to make any new contributions if you're kept in the old 401k plan, but sometimes some plans will allow you to make some adjustments to the investment holdings. But again, that's a case-by-case basis, and it really depends on the employer whether you can or cannot do that. So even though there's some pros, there's also some things on the downside that you also need to consider before deciding whether to leave your assets in your current or your previous 401k plan and at your previous employer. So some company plans may place certain restrictions on ex-employees. For example, some plan provisions may limit your ability to take distributions as you wish, and certain features such as loans may not be allowed. So in many cases, a minimum account value must also be maintained, and we already talked about that $5,000 that's typically in place. Also, your investment options will remain limited, and you're limited to those ones that's just offered through the plan. So if you're not happy with those options, you may wish to consider rolling your assets to a new plan or to an IRA. Next, keep in mind that some plans may charge higher fees than other plans are being in an IRA. In addition, there is the possibility that the plan options and provisions could change after you leave if the company changes 401k providers or if the company gets a new management team in place. The last thing that you need to consider, if your former employer is merged, sold, or goes out of business, you may have difficulty with locating a plan administrator to request a distribution. So those are some of the downsides of leaving your money with your previous 401k plan. The third option that is available to you is to roll over into a new 401k plan. And typically that's going to be at where you're currently employed. So some of the potential benefits of rolling over assets into a new 401k plan may include, again, there's no taxes or penalties. So if the funds are rolled over properly, you won't be subject to any income taxes or early withdrawal penalties. The assets that are rolled over into the new plan would also continue to grow tax deferred. Furthermore, if your new plan, it may have some better provisions and some better investment options and some lower fees. That can be a great benefit for you. By rolling over your assets to the new plan, you will also be able to consolidate retirement assets. So as I mentioned, it's not uncommon for employers to switch, various companies. And so if you have a 401k at multiple companies, you are able to consolidate under one house, which can be a great benefit for many people. One additional benefit is most 401k plans do offer the ability to take out loans. And so most 401k plans will allow you to take a loan. So while taking a loan from your 401k has, several benefits versus taking out a distribution. If you actually have like a short-term cash need. you won't have to deal with all the penalties and some of the taxes if you're able to pay back that loan efficiently and within a required time period. Opposite, there are some downsides that you definitely need to be aware of with rolling over your assets into a new 401k plan. And so there are some benefits. Well, again, let's look at some of the downsides and some of the potential cons that can be presented to you with that rollover. So we talked about earlier, there is some waiting periods potentially at a company. So if you have a waiting period, you won't be able to roll your funds over until that period is exhausted. And that period can typically, at some companies, be 6 months or even up to a year. Also, in a 401k, your investment options will remain limited to those offered by the new plan. And so if you're not happy with those new options, you may want to wish or look to consider some other options that may be available to you. There is also the possibility that the provisions of the new plan may not be as good as your old plan, or not as good as some other options that are available to you. Also, a part of the rollover process, your investments in the previous plan will generally be liquidated, and so you will have to develop a new asset allocation model and have to select some new funds whenever you roll it over into the new plan. The other things that you need to be aware of, some plans have a Roth 401k component, and so if you participated in a Roth 401k plan, and if your new company does not offer that feature, you will not be able to roll the money over. And so that's one of the things that you need to consider if you're taking advantage of some of those after-tax benefits that a Roth 401k can present. One other thing is that a number of people who work for public corporations may own company stock. And if you happen to hold company stock in your old 401k, you will generally not be able to roll it over into your new plan. If you do not wish to liquidate this stock, you will need to roll it over into an IRA or take it as a distribution. There are some special tax treatments of appreciated company stock, which may make it beneficial to take appreciated stock as a distribution and place it in a taxable account. And so for this reason, I advise that you consult a tax advisor before ever making a tax distribution or rollover if you have a significant amount of appreciated company stock. And then lastly, the rollover process, you will be required to complete some paperwork, and the rollover can take at least a week or it can go beyond that depending on how quick and how swiftly and responsive the two companies are able to interact with the rollover process. And so now let's look at our last option. And so you're able to roll it over to an IRA. So we already talked about your ability to potentially cash out. Secondly, we talked about your opportunity to keep the money at your previous employer. We also talked about the opportunity to move it over into your new 401k plan. And the last option that we're going to talk about and spend some time on is looking at rolling it over to an IRA. And so some of the potential benefits of rolling over assets into an IRA include that you're able to still get the tax deferral, and normally, again, you won't have any kind of taxes, penalties that are associated with it. Also, there's no early withdrawal penalty, as I mentioned. Typically, within an IRA account, you normally have more investment options. And so unlike in a 401k plan where investment options are limited to those offered by the plan, an IRA will generally provide access to a much wider range of investment options, including stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and exchange-traded funds. With an IRA, you generally have greater flexibility in terms of how and when your funds are distributed. And also by rolling over your assets into an IRA, you can consolidate your retirement assets. And so this can allow it to be much easier to monitor your investments and implement your investment strategy. So as I talked about with rolling over into a 401k plan, you have that same benefit with an IRA where you can consolidate multiple accounts all into one account and able to easily manage those funds according to your needs and your retirement goals. So with an IRA, there are some potential downsides or rolling the money over. And so as I mentioned with the 401k plan, typically the money will be liquidated. And so when you invest the money inside of an IRA, you will have to develop a new investment strategy and asset allocation model. And since IRAs normally have a much wider range of investments, I would suggest and recommend that you reach out to an investment professional to get advice on the best way and some of the best solutions to invest your money in. There also may be some transaction costs and fees associated with transferring your money over and also investing them into a new model that you need to be aware of. Normally, within IRA plans, you are not able to take any loans. And so with a 401k plan, as I mentioned, you are able to do that. So you lose that benefit and feature when you moved inside of an IRA account. The other thing is around early withdrawals. So both with a 401k plans and the IRAs, you generally will have to pay an early withdrawal penalty if funds are withdrawn prior to the age of 59 and a half. And a relevant exception does not apply, such as the first-time home buyers or any kind of qualified education expenses when you do a rollover, because you are able to get some exceptions if you just start an IRA account and you want to take out or need to take out a distribution for a home purchase or for education or for disability. However, when you roll it over, you lose some of those features and some of the benefits. Also, one of the things that you lose out within an IRA is the 55 age exemption that does exist with 401k plans. So some people may be aware, and some others may not, that within a 401k plan, there is an exception that allows you to take distributions out as early as the age of 55 rather than the age of 59 and a half. However, to take advantage of this type of benefit, all of your assets will have to be within only one 401k plan. And so if you retire, quit, or are fired for any reason, and you're over the age of 55, and all your assets are within one 401k plan, you can start to take out early distributions before the age of 59 and a half. The other thing that we already talked about is around company stock. So if you do have, company stock, you just need to, again, sit down with a tax advisor to make sure that you're making the best decision on what's going to benefit you in the best type of manner. So also, again, we're going over some of the same things. There is some paperwork that needs to be completed, and again, that just can take up, at least, it normally takes at least a week, but it can, take more, again, depending on the responsiveness of your old and former employer. And then the last thing that you want to, make sure that you're aware of, typically whenever money is in a tax-deferred account, such as a 401k plan or a traditional IRA, at the age of 70 and a half, you're required to take what they call required minimum distributions, which means that you have to take out a certain percentage of your assets at that time. And essentially, the government requires you to start taking the RMD because they want to tax that money. And so, again, with a 401k and with a traditional IRA, most of the time that money has not been taxed. So Uncle Sam needs to tax that money before it's too late, and that's why you're required to take those minimum distributions at the age of 70 and a half on your accounts. One of the other things that I definitely want to mention that's not necessarily on the screen, but you should consider this whenever just leaving an employer, and that's around the vesting schedule for companies and within 401k plans. Many companies will set up a vesting schedule as a way to incentivize their employees to stick around. And so with the vesting schedule, normally if the company is offering a matching component, they may have it where that matching component is invested or staggered, where you don't own all of the funds until a certain period of time. And so just keep in mind with any time that you're leaving a company that if you have a matching component, if you have a vesting schedule, if you leave before that vesting schedule is up, you may potentially lose out, several $1,000s if that money hasn't already matured and reached its vesting needs. So that's just one of the things that, you should definitely keep in mind. So if you decide to roll over your 401k assets to a new plan or an IRA, you can choose one of two methods, an indirect rollover or a direct rollover. And these two methods differ in terms of how the assets are handled and transferred. And so let's take a look at, some of those different things. So firstly, with the indirect rollover, you actually take possession of the rollover funds, and then you are responsible for transferring them to a new plan or an IRA. And so when you request an indirect rollover, your employer, they liquidate the funds, they send you a check, and as I mentioned earlier, they're going to automatically withhold 20% for federal taxes. And then it's your responsibility. You have 60 days to roll over that money into a new plan or to an IRA. And so any amount of the distribution that is not rolled over within that 60-day time period will be subject to ordinary income taxes and an early withdrawal period penalty if you're under the age of 59 and a half. And so in order to make a full rollover, you will also need to deposit a full amount of that distribution, including that 20% that the company withholds. So as I mentioned earlier, that 20% will have to come directly out of your own pocket to not incur any kind of taxes or penalties. And because of the complications and some of the potential tax and penalties that you can face for indirect rollover, it is generally in your best interest to have your old 401k transfer assets directly to a new plan or IRA through what we call a direct rollover. So let's look at how the direct rollover works. So a direct rollover can also many times be referred to as a trustee-to-trustee transfer. And so if you hear the word direct transfer, that is normally talked about and is referred as a trustee-to-trustee transfer. And so with this, if it's done correctly, you will not be subject to any kind of taxes or penalties, which is, again, we can see the benefits of that. And then also, you can still get some of the benefits around, tax deferral and all the other different features that are available to you within a new 401k plan or within an IRA. And so you never get a check. What happens is that your current 401k employer automatically, sends a check directly to your new plan or to the new IRA or financial institution, and you're never involved with it. So it's very easy, and I think it's the most beneficial way to do it without incurring any type of consequences. And so that pretty much wraps up our conversation. Again, we went over several different options today that are available to you that you need to consider or are able to consider when looking at whether what's in your best interest with managing your old 401k plans. And so at the end of the day, it all depends on what your goals and your needs are. And I just wanted to mention that Here at Morgan Stanley, we do have the tools and resources to help you evaluate to see what options are best and available to you. And so we have a lot of intellectual strength and capital. We are recognized as one of the leading financial institutions around investment guidance. And so if you have any additional questions or concerns or need to talk to me about anything specifically, I have my contact information on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. You can give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about your situation and your needs in greater detail. But Bridget, we can now open up the floor. If anybody has questions that they want to open or ask in the open forum, we're available to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. The program was very informative, and I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning of the program. This is being recorded, so if you would like to go back to any of the slides just for reference, you can actually access the recording on our YouTube channel. It's CareerInnovations, all one word, and you can type that into YouTube, and all our videos actually come up. So you will have access to this following the workshop. So if you do have any questions, please raise your hand. I will unmute your line, or you can type your question at the bottom. I do have a question. If you withdraw money out of your 401k before rolling it over to a IRA account, would I still have to repay the money from the 401k?
Yes. So if you take a withdrawal out, or if you cash out, or any portion of the money that is not deposited into your new IRA account will be considered a distribution, and you will be required to pay taxes on it. And remember, that includes federal taxes, state taxes, and if you're under the age of 59 and a half, you will have to pay a 10% penalty on it.
Okay.
And you have 60 days to make that rollover. Again, as I mentioned, if you took that withdrawal directly out of the plan, normally your employer is required to withhold at least 20%. And so when you make that new contribution into an IRA, you are required to pay that 20% that was withheld. And if you don't do that, again, the taxes will be incurred on that. One thing I just want to mention is that, many people fall in various income tax brackets. So if you are in a tax bracket that exceeds 20%, you will be required to pay that additional federal tax income. And so if you remember when we had that example with Stephen, he was in a tax bracket of 28%. So he had to pay an additional 8% tax on that $50,000, which equaled the extra $4,000. However, on the flip side, if you are in a tax bracket that is below 20%, then that can get reconciled when you can get some money back once you do your taxes.
Okay. And I hope that answers your question. I actually have a question as well. So I know that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, one of them is pre-taxed, and one of them is taxed, not taxed. The taxes are taken out before it goes into the account, and one is taxed if you withdraw it. Could you actually tell me how that works?
Yeah. Both of those are great questions. And so, Bridget, to your question, so you have typically two type of 401k plans. And one is your traditional 401k plan. And so with the traditional 401k plan, normally the contributions go in through a salary deferral process. And so they go in before any taxes are taken out. However, with that, the money comes in before any taxes are taken out. While it's in the account, the money grows tax deferred. However, when you start to take out distributions, that money will be taxed at that period, assuming, let's just say, when you're in retirement, that money will start to be taxed. The other type of common 401k plan is a Roth 401k plan. And so with a Roth 401k plan, the money that you contribute is after-tax money. And as long as you keep that money in for at least 5 years, and you're over the age of 59 and a half, when you start to take distributions out of that account, the money will come out tax-free.
And that actually leads to a question of mine. Would that money still hold or still be accountable of taxes if it's already been taxed, but say you borrow against that account before the age of 59, but it's already been taxed, would it still be subject to additional taxes?
So, not necessarily like tax, but it would be subject to like an early withdrawal period if you're under the age of 59 and a half.
Okay.
And so what you will want to do is, so let's assume if you're in a traditional 401k plan, again, a traditional 401k plan, the money goes in pre-tax. Normally, you will want to roll it over into a traditional IRA. If you want to roll that money over into like a Roth IRA, you will have to pay taxes on that money up front. On the flip side, when you start to take distributions out, during your retirement years, you will be able to get that money tax-free. However, but if you want to convert it before your retirement years, you will have to pay income taxes on it up front. If you have money inside of a Roth 401k plan, you will want to roll that money over into a Roth IRA account or another Roth 401k plan.
Okay.
So just the thing is normally when you're doing a rollover or a transfer, you want to roll it over or transfer it over to something that is a similar model. And what I mean by that is that for anything that's pre-tax, you want to roll it into something else that's going to normally be pre-tax, or something where you can get the tax deduction like a Roth, like a traditional IRA. If it's money that you put into after tax, you want to roll it over into another account that's after tax, like a Roth IRA. When you start to commingle funds, like so if you commingle funds from a traditional 401k and a Roth IRA, it becomes a real headache when you decide to start taking out distributions in retirement, and you will be responsible personally to trying to figure out, your tax advisor will have to be responsible for determining what portion of that money needs to be taxed, and that can be a very difficult process.
Okay. Well, there wasn't a question related to that. I was just curious about how that actually would be set up in those cases. Like you said, if you were trying to either withdraw money or even, like you said, roll it over to an account that isn't compatible to your existing one.
Correct.
Okay, well, I do not see any more questions as of now. Well, I will ask you before we do close, what are some takeaways from this workshop if someone was just looking for or just recently got a new job and, they were struggling with this, what is something that you want them to remember? And I think one that we just touched on, if you are going to roll it over, make sure it's being rolled over to a account that's compatible to your existing one. And what would be some other takeaways that you'll have?
I think the one thing you first need to sit down is just do an evaluation of what your goals are, both short-term and long-term. So assuming that you don't have any short-term cash needs, I would definitely recommend that you maybe look at and consider maybe rolling it over to an IRA or maybe into a new 401k plan if you like the features and benefits of it. And so I think that the first thing that, again, as I mentioned, is to evaluate what your short and long-term goals are. Secondly, to get an understanding of setting up a financial plan to know like how much income that you would need to save to reach your retirement goals. And so that's a very important, critical component, because if you're looking for something that can give you more flexibility, more growth, and more control, you know, all those different things are going to play into what options would be best for you. And so I would say at the end of the day is to, if you recently changed employers, or even if you changed employers, you know, several years ago, and you have a plan at an old 401k employer, is the best thing is to sit down with an investment professional, a financial advisor, or whoever you work with, to see you know, what goals or what options would be best for you.
Okay. And I think that's a very good point that you touched on, because many people are out there investing in 401ks and have no idea, you know, what they're investing for and what they're saving towards. They don't have any long-term or short-term goals in place. So you absolutely hit the nail on the head when you made that statement, and you really need to find out, you know, what your number is. And a lot of people are, you know, or they're working, but they really don't have a clear picture of what they're saving towards. So.
Absolutely, and that's the key. Planning is always the key, and so you want to make sure that those funds, you know, work for your benefit, because you have made the commitment and the sacrifice to save that money. So you want to make sure that that money, you're getting the best bang for your buck, and it's ultimately, you know, working for you instead of working against you.
Exactly. Well, I don't see any more questions. If there are, you definitely have Jarrell's contact information, his direct line, as well as his direct email address. Please don't hesitate to reach out to him directly. Again, you can access this recording on our YouTube channel, and definitely reach out to Jarrell if you have some needs as far as planning your 401k, not just rolling it over, but actually planning out your entire your entire retirement, because I do see many people are not doing that. And you know, when it gets closer to that age, you know, they find out there's a period of time where they drop the ball, and now they're having to double up in investing, and if that's even possible with some plans. I know some plans have only a limit of what you can actually put in per year, so you don't want to scramble at the last minute. I really do think that making sure that you're proactive in your retirement is key. So I think that's something that everyone needs to look at. So I really do appreciate your time, Gerald. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. And again, thank you for everyone who got on the call today. I greatly appreciate it.
Okay, and after this workshop, we do have a survey. If you could take the survey, it's about 10 questions. It pretty much asks how this workshop was, or overall feedback on what you expect, did it meet your expectations, and anything that we can do to better our best. You know, we really do look at the surveys, we take them seriously, and it also helps us plan for other workshops in the future. So thank you very much for your time. I'm going to go ahead and close out with everyone having a great day and a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.